let the people do that thing.
Perfect. I did hit the go live button. Could you also
Nice.
let me record, Dave?
Oh, yes. We'll let Vlad record. Vlad's recording.
Perfect.
I'm
We always keep
recording.
backups just in case.
Yes.
Because there's a lot of there's a chain of different software tools that we use to broadcast this, so we want to make sure that we want to make sure that we save a backup locally just in case. But we haven't had any issues. Like we cross our fingers
Knock
every
on
time.
wood.
We have not had many issues lately.
Speaking of not having issues, Vlad, we are live, so I'm going to jump in and do some community comments as we talk about every time. Everyone, welcome back to the reshoring theme. We had a fantastic conversation with Harry last week. Harry has actually started a podcast, Moser on Manufacturing, which I think will be very good. I don't have the link to that at the moment, but we'll try to drop the link in there. I think it's monthly. And so if you guys enjoyed the sort of conversation that we had last week, you should absolutely go ahead and check that out. Again, special thank you to Bright Machines for sponsoring this theme. As you guys will hear shortly, Adam works and is the VP over, or is a VP over at Bright. And so maybe we can dig a little bit more into to what they're doing as we get into reshoring. A couple of special announcements. Today is the last day for the Change Your Life giveaway. So you guys have heard me talk about it for the last 6 weeks. If you are watching this live or before May 12th, you are looking to get into automation manufacturing and would like to get your hands on some hardware, I'm going to go ahead and drop a bit.ly link in the chat for you guys to do that. Shout out to Preston and Envision Automation. Talking about other things coming up soon. Tomorrow I'm going live with Sam Gupta, Sam, friend of the show. Sam does, I think, 2 live streams every week because he's just absolutely crazy. On this, his Thursday digital transformation theme, we're talking about drop shipping business processes best practice. And I'm going to talk about how we have historically done that in manufacturing automation and what we can do better. Because I'm not going to forget this week, we'll shout out Frank Lamb. I don't think he has a mastering machine this week, but believe he has a mastering the machine at some point next week. As I mentioned last week, episode 8, Shoulder of Giants is out. Max and I are talking about what he calls big feet, and that is reasons that we run suboptimally, mostly completely within our head with no data to back that up. Yeah, so if you guys have other events or things that you want listed, please feel free to drop me a line on LinkedIn, because I'm not sure if any of us check the email. Besides that, I do get to embarrass Vlad. So Adam, this is my favorite part of the show. So Vlad runs a great YouTube channel, Solus PLC. They just cracked 30,000 subscribers. If we were one of those cool channels that had like rockets and stuff that went off, we would do that right now, but we're not. So congratulations to Vlad and Solus. We want to say hi to the folks at Solus PLC. If you guys are not subscribed, we want to go ahead and invite you to subscribe to Solus PLC on YouTube. Vlad,
Thanks,
any other thoughts? Of course, any other thoughts before we jump in?
No, that was an excellent introduction, Dave.
Fantastic. Everyone, welcome to Manufacturing Hub with me, Dave, and this guy up here, Vlad. We have made it to episode 61 on the reshoring theme, and we would like to introduce our very special guest, Adam Montoya. Adam, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us, Adam. Let us maybe find out more about your background. How did you get started? How did you get into manufacturing? And what led you to your current position at Bright Machines?
Sure. I think I kind of stumbled into it, right? So I'd say a little bit of the history was I was studying CIS and actually like kind of envisioned myself being I don't want to call it a computer programmer, but back then, like, I think computers were command line driven, much more difficult to use, and I was an uber nerd pretty early on, and I had an affinity for these things and gravitated towards them. And then, the trajectory for this was a systems engineer, and so systems engineer back then was very different what a systems engineer does today. Back then, this was a very broad title for people that basically installed data networks back in like coax crimping days and token rings and Novell, and then we migrated to like Windows NT. And so I was like the IT uber nerd, and then I found some success at this, started a company, and we got into actually reverse logistics business by complete happenstance. We found that as the computers were taking off, there was nobody in the United States that would repair them when they would break. So reverse supply chains didn't really exist 20 years ago. It's like kind of fresh and clean. And that grew pretty rapidly and got acquired. And I was planning to go do something else, start something more interesting. And in the midst of that company that acquired ours got acquired again. And somebody approached me and said, "Hey, would you like to go do an integration role?" And I'm like, "Well, what does that mean?" And they're like, "Well, you're basically going to onboard these people and make sure that they fit into our cultures and make sure that all of their systems are up to par." And I was like, "I've only been here a few months. Like, how could I possibly do this?" And so there was this massive consolidation in EMS and contract manufacturing in the 2000s, and I kind of rode that wave. Did this with a company called Solectron, which at the time was I call it top 3 of contract manufacturers. And somewhere along the line, Solectron and Flextronics merged about 7 years later and became this juggernaut of manufacturing, and just kind of the industry stalwart for all things EMS and reverse supply chain. So ton of great memories there. Grew up there, learned a lot, cut my teeth. And right at about 10, 12 years ago, I jumped the shark, and I had been doing MES deployments and putting in Rockwell automation systems and shop floor control systems. And I even did a stint with warehouse management and logistics systems. And we saw this trend with phones, like everybody that had the brick phone and the candy bar phones, like they had a keypad and a small screen with maybe 8 lines, or like the Nokia with the snake that's indestructible. We went from that. We had this reverse logistics and returns facility, and I'm standing out there. This place had at the time about 2,000 people, and hundreds of these people, their job was to press all the buttons every day and make sure the buttons work. And so I said, I bet we can automate this. And so came up with a load cell and put it on an XY gantry and had it go press the button. And somewhere along the line, they said, "You're the automation guy. So that's what you do now." And so I spent the next dozen years building out one of the core automation teams inside of Flex, and got to do all kinds of cool stuff. Like,
sorry to interrupt, Adam, that the phone application that was, I guess, testing like quality control for the phones, is that the application that they were?
It was diagnostics. So when phones took off, from the transition to bag phones to really becoming portable, all of the OEMs and ODMs were in China, so they didn't have a reverse supply chain to support the US. Motorola was the one exception. Down in Texas, they had a really good operation. But you had Sanyo rolling in, you had Denso, you had Kyocera, you had all of these brands that you thought you were just buying a Sprint phone. There's actually one of these 5 other OEMs, and they're all in Asia. So they set up a business that they would pay a bounty for you to take these returns in and diagnose them. And then there was a stratification that said, if it's level 1, level 2, level 3 kind of problem, you got paid more based on the diagnostic. Now, the inverse of that was if you went beyond this Pareto that they kind of expected, they would come in and audit you. And so literally we had dozens and dozens of people that would just take the phone and press every button, like, yeah, the 3 sticks. And so that's one billing code. If it's got an LCD broken, it's obvious. And so we mechanized that. And the reason why it had never been mechanized before was the constant turnover in the model mix. And so we came up with this concept of a device module. I called it a nest, but we technically called it a device module. And it's basically a bunch of interposers that customize the form factor to the device, but made all of the test and measurement hardware very generic. So it's a bunch of things. You can picture a bunch of pogo pins meeting some interface board, and then I'm moving the mechanicals and the acoustic pickups. I'm moving those per model. And so that was like it. That was the first time somebody had taken that reverse logistics model and applied it to mechanization. We found some good success there, and those boxes ended up all over the world, diagnosing phones. And a lot of that, the tricks we used for this went into production, like so actually qualifying manufacturing phones.
That makes sense. And I guess, how did you transition into Bright machines, or what was the story after the phones?
At Flex, I had these amazing opportunities, and I got to work on, when Apple decided to reshore the Mac Pro, it was like a really, really, really tough job. And it was like equal parts like the greatest thing I'd ever done and the hardest thing I'd ever done. And I was like super mentally fatigued. And so at the time, my boss was like, "Hey, go take some time off." And like Flex time off for like maybe a couple of days, but in this case, I took about a month off, and I was thinking about hanging up manufacturing. I posted on LinkedIn and responded to a comment today, and so I was like, I'm going to do it. And so one of the leaders at Flex calls me and he goes, "Hey, are you sitting down? I have this crazy idea. I want to automate shoes. I want to automate tennis shoes." And I was like, "Okay, you are." This was actually shortly after it was completely legal to smoke THC, and I was like, "You obviously have had something to drink or something to smoke." And he was like, "No, serious. Like, we're going to do this. We're going to figure out how to do it. We're going to automate things that have never been done before." And so I assembled a pretty strong team, and we went and tackled some really interesting engineering, namely, like, how do you handle flexible goods? How do you handle things that come from a supply chain that's already incredibly imprecise? And then the biggest complication is just the sheer volume of different SKUs. So like you think about manufacturing a cell phone in the 2000s, you had to support CDMA and GSM networks, so they have a different radio inside. They might have T-Mobile, Sprint, Verizon, or Bell, whatever the carriers were. You had to like customize that for the phones. But you get into apparel, the complexities of managing that manufacturing are gnarly. You've got left and right times a dozen sizes times a dozen colorways. So one pair of Jordan basketball shoes can have hundreds and hundreds of permutations. And so the way that it's principally been managed historically was like paper travelers and this concept of a musical size run where you're kind of guessing how many size 10s need to be made versus how many size 8s. Mm-hmm. It was very imprecise, and it breaks like manufacturing folks' head that don't come from that kind of industry. Yes. How can this be so imprecise? Well, if you've ever gone into a shoe store and found a pair of shoes you're just in love with, and then they don't have your size, this is why. Like the complexities of planning this are nuts. And it ended up being like a really, really cool job. It reinvigorated me and gave me back like, holy smokes, I want to do this. And then the core group of us from the automation team were sitting together, and Leo, the founder, is like floating this idea, and I don't know where it came from in the genesis, but he said, "We're going to spin this thing off. We're going to take this group, and we can get a better multiple out selling to other people." Now, along this journey, when we were inside of Flex, we were pretty regularly being asked to go work for our competition. Like, "Hey, I'm using dual source, so your competitor down the road is also producing for me. Can you go put in that system that you put in at Flex?" And the answer was no, we're not allowed to do that. So this gave us the latitude to engage with competitors often, and provide some more value. And we wanted to achieve something that at the time we thought was very niche. We thought it was specifically catering to the needs of contract manufacturing. What that was this concept of reusable manufacturing. Now, for your listeners and for controls people and kind of people in the space, of course you could repurpose a robot. Of course you could repurpose a PLC. But the actual customers of this type of automation, they couldn't. They don't keep these types of skills on the payroll. The idea of retooling it is one piece, but coming in and recoding it is a completely different monster. And in automotive, which is the most automated space, it's this really long life cycle, 4 and 5 years before they retool the line and make massive changes to the automation. And now they've fully depreciated that investment. In consumer digital, you've got 9 to 12 months. Like, you have to fully depreciate that investment, or you've got to find a way to make it infinitely reconfigurable. So that was the mission we had taken on. It's like, how am I going to make automation that is easy to reconfigure? I think that's when we all had the aha moment, like, oh my God, everybody wants this, everybody will pay for this. And that's why Bright Machines exist today and kind of what we do.
And I guess, Adam, if I may clarify, when you talk about the consumer goods, or I guess like electronic devices, you're talking about the phones, the smartwatches, the laptops. Are there like any other examples that you can give us that is a fairly short life cycle, so that the listeners maybe get a better picture of that industry?
Servers, any kind of personal digital device. Like, we don't see MP3 players very much anymore because they kind of merge with the phone, but things with, we call it electronics in a box. And it's really anything that's got a circuit board inside of a metal or plastic housing and an LCD. Those things have a shorter refresh cycle. So even printers, like on the professional side, I remember like the HP 4, which was a licensed engine design from GE, believe it or not. That's the most venerable printer, actually came from Genicom. That engine lasted like 12 years before people that made major, and all they did then was like kind of point, they improved the cosmetics and a few functionality pieces, but it kind of was around forever. Well, now, like, if you go buy a printer today for your house from Best Buy and you try to go buy another one in 18 months, it's probably already been refreshed. And so everything is getting shorter cycles as we connect it more. Not just IoT, but just like connectivity of everything. It's driving this cycle down, and it's kind of sad in a way. From a we don't fix things anymore. Everything's kind of become this disposable thing, very consumerist. But gosh, if it has a circuit board, it's got a very limited shelf life. And even a little bit in automotive, you're starting to see it, because every year, the Ford F-150 is getting more and more semiconductors in it. It's getting more sensors, and it's getting electronic. It's getting technoed, if you will, in a rate that tries to compete with the Teslas of the world.
And I think that's true to most like home appliances as well, right? Your dishwasher, your dryer, washer, fridge even has, screens and controls that are beyond what they used to be, even a decade ago. So it's interesting. I certainly agree that it's an interesting, I would say, manufacturing challenge of going through these very short cycles and then be able to change out the machinery, the tooling, the programming. But I want to touch on one comment that you made, and I know we spoke about this a little bit off stream, but the reshoring of the MacBook Pro. Could you tell us a bit more, I guess, and I'm certainly not an expert in reshoring, but what does that essentially entail? What are the steps or the thoughts that go into, I guess, first of all, to say yes to that initiative? And then how does it play out? Who are the main stakeholders that are involved in those discussions, and what does it take to reshore something like a MacBook Pro initiative?
Well, it was the Mac Pro, so it was like the desktop.
Okay.
The portables, they're probably on a different scale. I think, originally somebody inside of, the Apple ecosystem said, we really want to understand what it would take to actually reshore something. We want to know how hard it is. And we'll talk, the subject matter that you guys wanted to discuss was like, how do you do it? How do you accelerate it? I'll tell you kind of the story of what they went through. And they have unlimited resources and incredibly smart people. Just if you think that they're smart, if you haven't had the opportunity to work with them, brace yourself. But they went on this journey and said, let's figure out if this is feasible. And they looked at their product portfolio and said, all right, what is going to be, lower risk? You could never have even pitched the idea of the phone. At that point in the time, the phone was selling more units in one day, and I don't know the figures, but Gartner does. They were selling more of those phones in one day than the entire year of the desktop. And it wasn't to say that the desktop didn't sell well. That was to say that the phone was just incredibly high volume. And so they picked one and they said, okay, well, we've got to figure out the supply chain first. And I think somebody from manufacturing ops probably said, no, you've got to figure out manufacturing ops first. And then somebody from test said, do we even know how to make fixtures in the Americas anymore? So they had to go figure it all out. Mm-hmm. What people do when they're trying to go onshore, the smart thing to do is to either hire a partner, so a contract manufacturer that has a footprint in the Americas, and that short circuits half of it, right? Because they know the process, the tooling, the supply chain, the trade routes. They've already kind of got that stuff. And I think that, I don't know what Tim's long game is, but I don't think that they wanted to stand up another factory, right? I don't think that they wanted to own that. It's a huge pain to manage, right? So I think that they really wanted to be experts in managing supply chain and supplier management. So they partnered with a world-class contract manufacturer, and they said, okay, you guys know how to do this manufacturing process. You don't exactly know our manufacturing process, but we're going to come teach you, and somewhere in the middle we'll find a happy medium. And it was good and very, very painful. And I'll tell you why it was painful was because they were so used to working in China, and the workforce is very different between China and Texas. So the first thing was, figuring out what the labor model would support. And so we knew basically it was a spreadsheet exercise that to be cost competitive, we had to reduce this percentage of the labor. And it was at the time, it was a comically high percentage. It was like, that's not possible. And as a team, both the customer and the service provider side, we said, this is where we have to get to. And we have to mechanize a ridiculously high percentage. And we set off and made multiple work streams to do this. And it took us about a year. And it was a really interesting project in that we stood up a factory. We brought in engineers. I had an army of folks. There were 500 people hired for this. And nobody knew what was going on. Like there's like skunk works turned up to 11. The level of secrecy that those guys are able to maintain is unlike anything I had ever seen before. And I think I had like a personal NDA that, I'm not allowed to talk about. This was years ago, so I can talk about it now. But they kind of said, don't tell anyone. And ultimately, the slip up came from a planning and zoning official who was approving the inspection, and they put it on a memo who it was going to be to support. And so that's how the world found out that Apple was trying their hand at U.S. manufacturing again. So that was kind of the story of how you got there. They micromanaged the supply chain really tightly. They had preferred vendors, but part of it was figuring out, now I can't just import everything from Asia and then have you do the final assembly. Some companies have done this and they got a little bit of hot water, right? So the assembled in the USA versus made in the USA debate that kind of raged on for a little while. But these guys, they took it serious. The circuit boards were assembled there, so it wasn't an issue like where you're opening up a box of circuit boards every day and putting them in the check. No, they were doing the PCBAs on site at very high volume. Functional tests, burn-in testing of the boards before they would ever go into a chassis. And I can't divulge this, but they have they put their machines through a higher level of burn-in and testing than I think most people would have imagined. But they're brutal, so I think that's why their initial quality is very, very high. But we mechanized that whole thing, right? So if you looked at manufacturing, we use the term of value add and non-value add all the time. Mm-hmm. They said anything that's NVA, anything that's not value add to this, like, you have to mechanize it. It's the only way we make this work. And they had this philosophy that was unique to them. And I've seen other companies try to emulate it, but they don't quite get it. And if you told them that can't be done, they would say, is it can't be done because it's hard or because physics say it is impossible? And if it's physics, please bring me the math. And like, I love this Reddit's, they did the math. Like, you'd have to prove to them in either a DOE or with, real analysis behind it that something couldn't be done. They just don't have this culture of no. And it forced us. This is what I told you, it was like the hardest job I had ever done. It's like, why can't you mechanize this? It's really hard. It's really expensive. They don't care. Like, prove that it can't be done. And it forced us to stretch. We had never mechanized something that much before. And so it ended up being like the flagship kind of deployment. In the end, very tough. But I have long since been away from this, but I know that the next generation rolled out a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, and it stayed in Texas. I was really, really excited to hear that the next generation product stayed there too. So that became a world-class example of reshoring. Now, from a scale perspective, that is a drop in the ocean compared to what it would take to kind of bring back their phone business. Mm-hmm. But it encourages me that maybe someday we'll see local for local. If we can drive the cost of automation down and make it simpler and easy to scale to multiple geos, someday we can recognize the vision of local for local, which ultimately everybody wants. Right now, we just can't do it, right? If you have a $500 piece of consumer electronics and it uses a $150,000 tester to validate that it works, you can't put one of those testers in 20 locations. It just no. That's the thing that we're up against.
Did they manage to hit the target? You mentioned it was a very ambitious target of how well they would need to automate to make it worthwhile. Did they manage to hit that target?
They did. It was very, very painful, and they didn't hit it on day one. And famously there were some delays, right? So it was not an easy mission, but they did hit the goal. And boy, when that line finally got stable and humming, it's just amazing what they're capable of doing down there. And like I said, a testament is they got the next generation product 4 years later.
And Adam, go ahead, Dave. Go ahead.
Okay, I was going to say, I think that's very interesting because as Adam talks about all the mechanization and automation, I feel like one thing is, controls engineers, people that automate things, we don't necessarily think of as the system and the line. And so the more automation you have, the more dependencies you have, and everything has to be perfect in the cell behind, if you will, in order for the next mechanization to go properly. And then when you have 5 or 10 or more of those in a row, it becomes very difficult, and it has to be much more perfect than most people are used to when we talk about automation. So I think that is very interesting. And then to Adam's point, he was talking about kind of low volume, high dollars. I've also seen, especially in like retail, especially in like fast fashion, right? So we talk about, hats a lot. And right, so Preston's hat, the one that I was wearing last month, it is something that he can't possibly have the hat embroidered overseas and then shipped over to the US, because that doesn't make sense, because it makes sense to make 5 or 10 or 100 of these relatively local, and then you can go over and pick them up. So I think that there is a lot of opportunity kind of around the board when we talk about that. But Vlad, you had a question.
Yeah, I did. Adam, you mentioned one thing, that when they were bringing back the manufacturing to the US, and I guess like this is a key component, I would think, for a lot of the, I would say, manufacturers, is whether you bring a facility, or I guess you start a facility of your own, or you go with a co-packer, co-manufacturer. What, how does that decision get made? And I guess I'll maybe illustrate like the example from my past experience, because I've worked with food facilities, and in many cases they do go with a co-packer that can supply them, just enough volume to fulfill certain quotas in, let's say, like in peak months. But why would you say that they didn't want to go with their own facility? Like, what's the, I guess, like, what did they shy away from by not going that route?
I can't speak for them. I wasn't in that kind of a meeting for their decision criteria. But what I hear very regularly is like it's as basic as, I don't want to own the real estate. Like, I don't want to have a facility. And it, don't think of it in terms of a concrete pad and 4 walls. When you say own a facility, you got to hire HR, you got to bring in IT systems, security, parking lots, food vending. Like, there's a whole bunch of things that it entails that is just a real pain.
Mm-hmm.
And then we touched on this on our other conversation too. Some of these skills are going away. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. I hope we get into it. Like, 20 years ago, to hire, what do they call these guys? A foreman. You had this job of a foreman, or a facilities, I don't even remember the title anymore, but these people that existed to run manufacturing plants and factories. They're hard to find now. And so if you don't go with a partner, like you use the co-packer example, you have to build out all that infrastructure. And it starts with, getting a facilities engineer, getting an HR person, getting an IT person, then finding real estate you can lease, and all of that before you can even get started on the process of making your widget. You've got to build this foundation. And that's the part I think a lot of big household brands, I think that's the part that they shy away from. And they don't have these people anymore.
Yep.
They just don't have them anymore. And the folks that run HR, you have to have somebody local, right? There's always issues. The folks that run IT, there's got to be someone local. So you could take a company like Apple and imagine that they've got a really amazing support infrastructure for all their retail stores, but those skills are very different than the person that is going to go manage facilities for a 1 million square foot production site with conveyors and controls and access and badges and just kind of all of that stuff. I don't think they want to do that. And it's not cost effective, right? So the whole value proposition of contract manufacturers is to get better asset utilization of the building, the badge readers, the benches, the tools, the chairs. You get better utilization if we put multiple people in a co-pack facility, and that's not lost on these folks. And the other thing is, we'll talk about how to do this, but it's the same way that they offshored in the first place. And in the first place, you took the people that knew how to do this from those manufacturing facilities. Early in my career, you take those folks, they go to Asia. They live there for a few months as an expat or years. You take this steward that used to run this operation, and they teach the outsource provider or the low cost region, they teach them how to do the special sauce. And the benefit to the company is that you've got this person or persons on the payroll for maybe a year, but you don't have all of those high cost people that you used to have. But there is a ramp up period. So people are going to ask, like, how would you start reshoring? I would do it the exact same way. I would go to the people that manage my line in Shenzhen right now, and I would find a few of those kind of core engineering and operations people, and I would make them expats to help me stand up the facility here. You have to get this tribal knowledge. There's certain things. If a line's been running, for 3+ years, it's polished, it's smooth, it's working by now. And so no matter what you do, if you stand it up somewhere else, even if you moved a line from Tennessee to Kentucky, it's going to be bumpy because you have a bunch of new people. So I think that's kind of the approach that you have to take is you salt your workforce with some folks that have done this before. You kind of have that expense, but we have to rebuild. We have to rebuild this capability. Here in town, there used to be a dozen tool and die shops. It was like 2 left. It's just those ancillary and kind of supporting systems are not plentiful. So you gotta get any head start you can. And for that reason, I think some contract manufacturers are going to get ahead of the curve. And I know some of the Asian CMs are already setting up US based operations to get ready for this. I mean, Foxconn has been notorious, not in the news sometimes for some of the greatest things, but they were the first one that were like, hey, we're going to get ready for reshore. So they started standing up facilities in North America. Yep. They're ready for it, right? Hopefully that trend accelerates.
Yeah, and I guess the reason, go ahead, Dave.
I was going to say, I think you bring up a really good point, Adam, and I'm not going to use his name to quote him, because I don't know if he wants me to use his name. But I work with a gentleman who is in the contract manufacturing space, and he also deals with a bunch of other contract manufacturers and deals with kind of all the influx of the money into the various markets. And his thought on the topic is basically, why would anyone go stand up their own manufacturing facility, right? So if, let's say Vlad wants to go make makeup, right? Vlad wants to go make makeup, his choices are go find a contract manufacturer that will mix his mix and go package it into generally normal packages running down the same line using the same filler and machines that they already have, or find $50 million, $75 million, and go build machines, go find a facility, go hire all of those humans. I think that as we talk more about reshoring, especially in the short term and probably into the medium term, we're going to find contract manufacturers, people that have already figured out how to put whatever you're making into the wrapper, are going to kind of significantly and maybe exponentially increase in opportunities. And then maybe down the road, medium to long term, maybe at that point, there are some companies that find it important enough to go build their own facilities. But to Adam's point, so many people have lost the skills and knowledge to, how do I go build this? How do I go create a facility, design a line, make something run? That there is that huge skills gap that we currently possess, at least in North America.
It's true. It's absolutely true. Like, I had joked with you guys before that our skill sets are becoming a little rare, and people are paying a premium for this, and it's going to kind of accelerate as more and more of the workforce that remembers manufacturing retire. There's a couple of things that have never moved, right? So cars are still made here. If you count final assembly, which what it is, a car factory is doing that. If you've ever gone to an automotive facility, it's, first of all, it's amazing. Like, those guys are the best in the business. But let's be real, right? There's not raw steel coming in one side and a Toyota coming out the other. There's a ton of tier 1 and tier 2 vendors that are JIT delivering pallets of prepackaged goods. Yep. You could argue that they're more assembled because the electronics might come from Mexico or Japan. If you think about making a car, it's a lot like being a systems integrator, right? Like we didn't invent the robot. We don't want to do that. We didn't invent the sensors we use to control our robots, but we're integrating them like a Toyota. And really the role of the integrators is to have killer apps or features that make them stand out from others. Some of them it's going to be service or this niche expertise, like the folks that do paint automation, like highly specialized. And, you know, they're basically building something as complicated as a Corolla. Kudos to them. So I think, you know, the other, whoa, I have a fan here. I think the other thing that's going to prevent folks from wanting to stand up these factories is, you know, the skills challenging to find, but also like we have trained them on the whole notion of economies of scale and the outsource model. It's tough to untrain all of that at once, and that's what you'd ultimately be asking. And I don't think tons of them are going to have the appetite now. The folks that really, really, really own their product, maybe the folks that set up their own manufacturing hubs, their own internal in low-cost countries, they're going to have the appetite to do it because they didn't lose this knowledge. They still take that very seriously. And there's either some intellectual property protection, either in the product or the process, that they don't want it out there. And then I think those folks will do stuff. The other sector besides automotive that still make things here is white goods. And I think white goods are made in the US because they're too expensive to ship from Asia. Like that's just like the shipping density is terrible. I don't think that they can be as profitable as they'd like to be. So we still know how to do those things. But I don't know that I don't think we were ever tremendous at consumer electronics. Like a ton of that came from Taiwan and then shifted to China. So.
I really like that last like comment, I guess, Adam, and I think like again like drawing from my, I would say like early career experience at Procter and Gamble, and I guess like one of the reasons why I would see a problem with co-packers or co-manufacturers is that we worked with this plastics moldings company to provide us some of the raw materials, and if anything, like they ran extremely lean, right? So they didn't have enough like personnel to run, I would say, optimally at the time. Obviously, this was almost close to a decade ago now, but we had a lot of trouble making sure that they were able to provide us with enough materials that we needed to run lines in our facilities, right? And so there were even instances where I would go on site to their factories and make sure that they're running optimally and try and figure out, you know, their problems so that again they could supply us enough parts. That's why again like maybe I've seen it from that side of things. That's why I'm always a little bit questioning the model of why shouldn't we manufacture ourselves, because I think there's maybe this like breaking point or like a balance between obviously you would have to hire a lot more staff and manage a lot more, but there's also in my mind a higher quality that comes in with having your own team and be able to manage that internally versus relying on someone external. And again, I wasn't involved in the politics and the discussions, but I could tell you from like an engineering standpoint, I also couldn't just walk in and do whatever I wanted, right? Like because it was parts produced for us, but it was still a co-manufacturer. So there's difficult lines to cross when you work that way. But that's just again like my experience. Maybe that's why I'm always questioning how we reshore back to the US.
You bring up a good point, and I've seen both scenarios. I've seen the scenario that you describe, and I've seen something a little different. So, for the scenario you described is because a commodity sourcing person decided, you know, I'm going to pay 6 cents for this plastic bottle or widget or whatever it's going to be, and they put it out for competitive bids, and you know, Adam Co decides I'm going to bid on this, and I've got to produce it at 4.3 cents to allow for some margin for myself. If I hire enough people to run this the way it should be run, probably going to lose money. But you know, that's the scenario they're in, and you take these gambles, and contract manufacturers, they do this all the time. They take this gamble of like, I'm going to run this at break even, and the reason why you take a business at break even is now the next bottling line I put over here, all of my overhead is covered by this one that's just break even, and so that's the gamble they're always trying to make. And if they don't get that second customer in a timely enough fashion, what they do is they start cutting the resources that are allocated to that. And that's when the customer ultimately starts to suffer. I think, to do this well, you need equitable partnerships, right? Where there's a shared risk and reward model. Those always work the way you described. Like, you can walk in, open door, the suppliers are more responsive. But, we've been conditioned for years of moving to these low cost region where it really is down. This is my landed cost per unit. And the other thing, like domestic companies are really programmed to, this is crazy to me. They hire a CM in a low cost region, but they also hire a third party sourcing organization that goes and monitors the quality.
Mm-hmm.
And so like you didn't trust the CM's quality. You couldn't pay them a little bit more. You had to hire this independent third party. Maybe you should stand up your own facility. Nike, massive operations. Like whatever you think you've ever seen that's big, quadruple it. And so what they have is these regional folks peppered all through Asia. They're their own set Nike badged people, and they're going to these factories and they're checking the quality and they're living on the line when there's a problem and expediting things, and they're really close with those factories, right? Like it's no Mr. Montoya. It's, oh, hey, Adam, hey, when we're done, you want to get a beer? Like they're very tight with these guys. But they have figured this out, and they've always been they've always had to build these supply chains. You think about, like, a lot of our companies started here and then we moved there. Maybe we got it right, maybe we got it wrong, but that was this scenario you described. But let me tell you the flip side of the contract manufacturing that does work pretty well. And that's that you're doing something that to you is hyper specialized. Mm-hmm. Me as the CM, I'm doing it for you and 4 of your competitors. Mm-hmm. And some big value unlocks happen there. The easiest thing to wrap your brain around is, like, you come to me and I'm making a cell phone for you, and I'm making 2 other cell phones. I can put a wall between those lines. I can make sure that there's never any IP bleed over. That's very common in contract manufacturing. But now you get access to the unified shipping rates of all 3 of you. That's a very real value prop that comes out of the CM model, where you take a Foxconn or a Flex or any of those folks. They have these crazy shipping rates that it was really painful for me when I left the company. I had to go ship something at UPS store. I was used to call it $10, and now it's 40. I don't know what it was, but it was substantially more. And I'm like, holy smokes! On a much more massive scale, that's what's happening with all the products they're producing in their factories. So there's that shared HR resource, the shared IT guy or gal. There's the shared controls engineers that support multiple lines. So there is some inherent economies of scale you get out of that, and it's their core business. Look, Apple's core business is ubiquitous, beautiful, easy user experience, right? Apple's like, I don't know what they would describe themselves as, but I'm sure that they would love to be just basically an accessibility engine for the internet and unifying human networks, like something good and wholesome like that. They don't necessarily need to be in the hardware business or want to be in the hardware business because their software is so damn good now, and like that's kind of where they're at. But one thing they certainly don't want to be in is the manufacturing business. So difficult to kind of get them into that.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like I said, I see this kind of in many ways from multiple companies. Again, on the like manufactured like home goods, or I would say like food, whatever. You see a lot of that too, because I think at the end of the day, those companies are also mostly branding companies versus manufacturing facilities, right? And I think that's what I've seen in many cases. They would rather be able to outsource somebody making that product than necessarily having all the skill sets that they produce, because again, companies like P&G, Kraft Heinz, Post Holdings, like they're very good at branding their products, and that's ultimately where the value is. But like I said, I guess maybe it's my enthusiasm for manufacturing automation. I still remain positive in the sense that I think that they shouldn't lose that skill set entirely, right? Like I think it's going to be difficult when you spread yourself almost like too thin and all you do is assemble maybe the final piece or wherever the IP comes in, or something that's proprietary to them, and that's the only component that you touch, and all of a sudden if there is a problem in one of those suppliers, you run into a lot of issues. But I think like we can spend a lot of time, like discussing this back and forth. I think there's no maybe like clear answer, right? It's probably like a gray area depending on where you stand. But I do want to dive into Bright Machines a little bit. I know that we have to thank them, but maybe after we thank them.
Yeah, Vlad's going to play a noise that we can't hear, Adam, and then I'm going to thank Bright Machines, and then we're going to talk a little bit about them and the skill sets that we're missing and how to get there. You go, Vlad. Perfect. So we want to thank Bright Machines for sponsoring the reshoring theme. At Bright Machines, we believe there's a smarter way to build things. That's why we're working with manufacturers around the world to rethink manufacturing operations for whatever comes next. We enable manufacturers to reshore more quickly, to future-proof their factories, to keep up with fluctuating demand, and to save money. With a full stack solution for assembly and inspection that marries deep industry and technology expertise with hardware and software in new ways, for a more intelligent approach that's more flexible and more scalable for the next normal and beyond. And then Bright Machines has a couple of items on reshoring that we talked about last week. So they've got a reshoring guide for 2020 and top 5 answers for reshoring. I'm going to go ahead and drop those links in the chat. Those links will also be in the show notes if you guys are listening on podcast form. Vlad, why don't you go ask Adam a little bit about Bright Machines, and then I would like to make sure that we dig into the skills gap that we currently have and potentially how we can solve that.
Well, I'd like to learn, I guess, Adam, a little bit more about the solutions specifically from Bright Machines and maybe what you and your team are working on as well.
Sure. The solution is a modular platform for automation, and we use the term full stack, and really what we're saying is that from software to hardware, it works together, much the same way, a really slick smartphone is going to work. And we use the analogy all the time, like, the best embodiment of the Android experience is the Nexus phone, right? They had to go build this because they watched everybody else building machines for a long time that didn't really get it perfect, and they finally got it perfect on one that they did themselves. We sell robotic appliances that we believe are the perfect hardware to complement our software. But we are a software-first organization, and we believe that the key to not just reshoring, but just efficient manufacturing in general starts with software defining the process. Now, it's opposite of what we do today. Today, we kind of take the product, we figure out how it's going to go together, we might reverse engineer it, we might forward engineer it, might have a CAD file, we may not. And then we build these bespoke systems around that process. And that works really, really well, and it's hyper efficient. If you told me I need to make 10 million of this product that's never going to change, custom automation might be the way to go. But you told me I'm going to make 1 million a year, and every other year it's going to change a little bit. There's going to be a different form factor or more sensors or more stuff, i.e. phones. There's a tremendous value prop in our approach in that we're going to go from CAD, tear it down, and move into really discrete manufacturing steps with these robotic appliances and their modules. So if you said I'm going from 1 million to 1.2 million, cool. Split the line out right here, drop 2 more modules in, here's your additional capacity. And then, I have this problem. Every 9 months, we start, working on the next generation model, but I can't take this line down to start doing my NPI. This is a very real problem for electronics manufacturing. Well, we can do your NPI digitally, right? So you're taking this and we're putting it through our software platform, and we're figuring out the actual robotic steps, the robotic process, what sensors are needed. We're doing all that in the cloud in a CAD model.
What's an NPI? Sorry to interrupt.
New product introduction. So the joke is like you get 1 week off after shipping the latest phone, and then you start working on next year's. And so part of that problem is that you have to retool the whole line. In our world, you're doing this digitally, so it gives manufacturers a giant head start and a competitive advantage in terms of like debugging the process, going faster, and preparing for the next widget faster. That's kind of our big piece. And so we have the software that it's kind of like a factory OS. And if you have really modern MES systems and really good analytics, great, we'll talk to that. We'll make them smarter, because we're going to give you real parametric and performance data of what your line is doing in a way you've never probably had access to it. Most people, they get an end of day report that says, I made this many widgets and this many of them were good. We're going to tell you that at this discrete process step, the pressure is drifting. We're going to tell you like, hey, this thing's probably going to need repair at some point. We're going to tell you what the OEE impact's going to be to making this process change. And so that's where we're fundamentally different. We start with software. We don't write the software after the hardware is bolted to the floor. We start with a software first approach.
And so you provide, I guess, like that solution, but if I understand correctly, you also build the manufacturing cells that execute and assemble the components?
Yes. We have a catalog of what we call BRCs, or bright robotic cells, and they're automation appliances. So there's a 6-axis or a SCARA or a gantry. And so when you bring me your product, we're modeling it in the system, and I'm dragging and dropping which one of these building blocks I want to do this function. Maybe I don't need all the degrees of freedom, so I'm gonna drop a gantry here. Maybe I need to settle really fast, so I'm gonna use a SCARA, and I'm gonna move the fixture very close. So I'll pick the right building block for the task at hand, and that includes dispensing, fasteners, pressing. So we have these building blocks, and the experience for you is not unlike installing a printer at home. Like when you install a new printer, you might plug it into your computer, maybe it's wireless. You just load the driver in, and all of the functionality works. Nobody's writing software and code, but today, if you're buying robotic systems, that's what you have to do. You have to write the driver. So our whole bundle, when we say here's a building block, you load the driver over the web, and it now tells you how to manipulate this Fanuc robot. You want to jog it, you use the HMI. You want to actuate a gripper, you use the HMI. It's like the Linksys experience when you install a new router in your home. You don't know how to go manage the command line and set up routing and all of those scripts that are happening behind it. You're just using the GUI. That's the experience we're giving you. But these aren't cobots. These are industrial grade, production ready systems that have sensors, have really high MTBF, and kind of have the stuff that you need for an industrial application. Does that kind of articulate what we do?
Yeah, it makes sense, and I can only imagine like the complexity, right? Because there's also machine vision probably that comes in to probably inspect the parts, understand like what's going on, because it's not always just sensors that can measure, let's say, as you said, like the pressure or maybe the deviation that happens between parts, but also cameras that try and inspect the modules and then relay that information that you need to. Again, there's a lot of data probably that comes in through these modules.
There's inspection, which is we have our business is broken up into these kind of 3 pillars, but inspection is one of our cores. And so looking at what we did is a really big function of our day-to-day life. So I put it together. I have inserted this module into this crevice, and I put 3 screws in. Now take a picture, and did it look right? Yes. That is a core piece. What we're doing that's a little bit unique to others is inspection is to us viewed as a bit as table stakes. What we're trying to get to is predictive, and it's not ready for prime time yet, but we're going to get there. It is our mission. Really, where we're going to take the OS is to look at this board now and say, I see these 3 holes. Are those? Do you want to put a fastener in those? Click here, and then push that program to the robot. That's the ultimate where our OS is going. Hey, that looks like an edge connector. Would you like to apply force? Yes. Now imagine if you could that's as simple as it was to program a complicated robot. It's bad for controls engineers, but Like it's really great for manufacturers that are, quite frankly, they can't find controls engineers today anyway. So that's what we're doing. And we're taking it away from, dedicated, highly specialized skills, and we're moving deployment of industrial robots down to the technician, right? So the technician can go into this HMI and say, I want to do this really complicated function, or I want to trigger these IOs. And they just drop into a menu and they'll grab the object for, a linear press and say, I want to apply this much pressure for this much time. And I want a force feedback loop. You can just drag these objects over and create it in the same way that you would, design a flow chart. It's very like, you're like, whoa. When you look at the old way we do things versus kind of our approach, it's a little bit fresher. But in the end, it's to, help bridge that gap. We're going to talk about skills. We're democratizing industrial robots. Like that's the goal.
I'm very curious about those challenges. Again, I can only imagine what goes into, I would say, obstructing the current difficulty in programming robotics. Mm-hmm. And I would almost say somewhat ancient methodologies and how those languages are structured. So I'm happy that, it's going to become easier because, again, I know that there's a high premium on those skill sets and it's very difficult to learn for many reasons. And so if we can make it easier and more accessible, I think that's going to be a great win. Dave, what are your thoughts on this?
I think absolutely. I love everything Adam is saying. I would love to at some point be able to go out and kind of see this in action and see as normal people are building factories, because Adam's vision, I mean, if we can get there, the industry will be better as a whole. And if it's Bright who is helping to lead the way into democratizing programming and all of that, I think we will all be better for it if we can just start shipping better data analytics, MES, other solutions that show you useful data, as opposed to just a sea of numbers that then take a experienced controls person or an experienced automations person to then drill down into it. I think even that in and of itself is valuable. So I'd love to find a way to go out and see it in person in the near future or at some point, because it's a very exciting, it is very exciting what you guys are doing, Adam. And then with that, I want to make sure that we talk upon kind of the skills, right? So it seems like what you guys are doing at Bright will help alleviate the skills gap. But as we've talked about for a good portion of the last hour, there are simply not enough people who understand controls or who understand manufacturing to go out and build 10,000 new facilities if we decide to go build new facilities tomorrow. What is your take on that? And where do you think that we as a industry, we as a world have to go in order to help reinvigorate some interest in manufacturing?
I think it has to start with some policy, right? I think governments need to take some accountability for this, COVID was like a real eye-opener. Do you remember the mask shortage?
Yeah.
Do you know what a mask making machine costs?
No.
$12,000.
Wow.
You can buy them on Alibaba. It's $12,000. And we couldn't do it, right? We couldn't figure it out. We couldn't solve the problem. And I think that was the most in-your-face example of why you something has to be done at a policy level. We could not give her. I remember I worked on a project with a hospital to create this UV sanitizer so they could reuse masks. I did, that was my contribution. And so I pointed out to somebody from the government. I was like, you can buy these on Alibaba. And they said, well, we couldn't get them in anyway. There's tariffs. It's complicated. And I was like, you know what you can do then? Pay them $1,000 for the solid model. Just give me the design and we can use a very low cost fabricator over here. I can get you a robot. And so that was like the greatest in your face example. Like, we've got to figure out the things that are mission critical and be able to produce them anywhere. And then there's other things that like are just good for the environment. Maybe make local for local. And local for local does a couple of things. One, it allows you to hyper tune for your your local customer. It completely negates the crazy amount of inventory that's stuck on the supply chain. Right now it's 2 months, right? You got a month on the water from China, and then you got a month stuck in port waiting for some inspector.
Yep.
Like, local for local gets that down to like a week's worth of inventory. So asset velocity goes up, profit goes up. It actually probably, once the flywheel is spinning, it's probably cheaper. And so we have to do that. But when you say, how do I address the skills gap? I look at it from two ways. One, we have to upskill our workforce. And today, the way that it works is if an operator is using a complicated machine, they might use pedals, or they might put their fingers in little sensors to index it, but they don't actually have the ability to edit what the machine does. What if they see a bunch of parts that are coming in that are a little bit non-conforming? Well, they have to call the support engineer. The support engineer comes out and validates what they saw. And then that support engineer calls the local SI. They schedule a tech to come out and modify a recipe. They recompile this, push it to the PLC, stand there and make sure that it works for a little while, sign off, and then leave. And like, this whole thing, this still has an operator there standing there watching this whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Our belief is, why doesn't the operator just go over and plug in this offset? It triggers an alert for a local engineer to validate this change. They can do this from their phone. Boom, no stop. So we're going to upskill, kind of the capability of the operator to begin. Mm-hmm. And then, what does it do for the controls engineers, right? So don't be super nervous. We're not gonna make you obsolete, but your capability will be 4 to 5x, right? The idea is not to eliminate the controls engineer. Like, you can still go in behind the GUI and actually go in and tweak the text if you'd like. But we're going to give you the ability for the really simple things to 4x your productivity. And especially the things that you're like, oh, I don't want to go on site to go deal with this. It's so trivial. You're going to be able to go in straight through a web browser, hit the back end, and make this change, and then look at a camera inside and say, yep, that's what I was looking for, go. And it's done. And so upskilling the operator to get them to more of that technician skill, which is where we need them to be anyway. And it's a job that they're going to like more, and they're going to respect more, and they'll be more versatile. And then taking our automation resources and 4xing their productivity. If you used to deploy 50 robots a year in your small SI shop with the same resources, we're going to get you to 200. It's kind of the goal.
My question would be, maybe on the education side, how do you compete with the traditional, I would say, like software companies when you're, let's say, a controls engineer, a software engineer, hardware, whatever, that are offering now, again, because of the pandemic, I would say much better advantages in many aspects to go work for them versus going to a traditional manufacturer? Like, how do we entice, I would say, the youth to see manufacturing as a field that is offering a good career opportunity?
I think there's a BLS website, the Bureau of Land and Statistics, I believe is what it stands for, but it actually rates all of the career opportunities in the United States, and it shows the growth. This data is anywhere from 2 to 5 years behind at any given time. But I looked at her. I have a daughter who's a recent graduate mechanical engineer, and early on, I asked her the question very directly. I was like, how did I convince you to do this? And she said, you told me that manufacturing was secretly running the universe, and it was cool, and it was sexier than people thought, even though it's so I tricked her, is what I said, was what happened. But the growth right now shows like industrial engineers at like 14% or something like. I think it's very low. I think it's very behind. And at the same time, it shows software engineers at 22%. I think that's really getting stale, because as software languages have evolved and there's like all these tools on the cloud, like, I don't think we need as many programmers as we might have. Like, where the university system always takes a little while to catch up with supply and demand. So I think it'll right size itself, and I think you'll see it in salaries. And I think that the salaries are going to become a key driver. If we go through this manufacturing renaissance, which we're starting to see, I think those skills become more in demand, and they inherently start to fall subject to the rules of supply and demand. I think these new graduates will get paid more. The other thing you have to do is philosophically, we have to make manufacturing cool again.
Mm-hmm.
We have to make some pride. And, you know, Henry Ford sold a lot of cars to his employees, right? He was like, that was the whole concept. I'm going to build you up so you can actually afford to buy this thing that's way better than a horse and carriage. And you know, you become the backbone of you know, society and infrastructure. The reality of things is service jobs and, you know, retail and commerce jobs, for every dollar of that, there's about 50 cents created in the orbit, right? Supporting those functions, supporting those people. So that's like, you get this halo effect. Manufacturing, every dollar is about $1.50 in the halo, right? So it's from a governmental and you know, national pride thing, it's huge, right? So when Ford's coming to your town, it's not the Ford plant that is really driving all that economic engine. It's all the tier 1 suppliers that are now going to be on the perimeter. It's all the tier 2 folks that are now going to be competing for jobs. So it rises with all the ships. But we have to work with universities. We have to work with you know, trade schools. We have to work with all of these types of resources to build some coolness back into manufacturing. And I think the best way you can do it is products that are like just super romanticized, made in the USA. Like, that should be really proud, right? Like, when you get you know, any version of a product that's been made local for local, it should have like the local flag on, right? It should be a specialty product, and it should be like you know, product red. Product red costs the same price as a regular iPhone, but you know that some portion of it goes to this certain, like, we should be doing the same thing with domestically manufactured goods, and the people that make those things should take great pride in it. And also, dirty secret, but the sneakerheads know this. The sneakerheads know the footwear factories that make the best shoes. I'm not going to get into this because I do too, but the sneakerheads know. Now, imagine a world where, you know, you'd look at a factory code on a TV and be like, yeah, that's made in Alabama, like, got some pride here, that's supported by the university. Like, I think that's the kind of programs we have to do, and we just have to make it cool. And we have to get some brand ambassadors that are cool and make it sound pretty fun.
Are there such initiatives? Sorry to interrupt, Adam. Like, I guess like it's almost like an obvious like question, but so I really like the fact that you mentioned red, because I think that's a very, I guess, like, interesting like branding opportunity that gives back. But is there anything like that for manufacturing that you know of?
No, and you know, if you guys have inroads to any politicians, you guys have already earmarked the money for this stuff. It's out there, like, it's there. I don't know where it goes to. I don't know how it gets spent, but there is money set aside for this domestic manufacturing, and everybody's vying for it. It would be awesome if we actually facilitated some programs that got this out there, that raised awareness. Like, you know, think about these ads, the ads that have compelled kids to stop smoking for years. Like, that's governmental funding, that's policy change, and like, you probably need to do the same thing to bring manufacturing back.
I would throw in, I guess, like, my idea would be like factory tours, because I think like you really don't get the picture that again, you know, when I was just starting in manufacturing and I would tell my friends like what I was doing, it's very difficult to paint a picture. Obviously, you know, there's some trade secrets involved, and there's some proprietary machinery maybe that they can't show, but ultimately when you see it in person, I think it's almost like a wow, like, this is a really cool place to be. There's a lot of, again, like, interesting projects that are being run. There's a lot of again, there's initiatives, there's a lot of funds, I would say, to do different like R&D projects, and so it's a very interesting, I think, like dynamic that people are just not exposed to enough, right? Because again, there's a lot of closed doors, so to speak, from the end users, and they just quite frankly don't show off their, I would say, like engineering or even technical prowess, so to speak.
You know, when you're doing like the later stages of engineering degree, like you have to do these like uh, big group projects or something like that. We could move that back, right? You can have the kids doing this in middle and elementary school. And in fact, we gave a we gave a lean manufacturing class to a bunch of eighth graders last year. It was like part of a community outreach. And so I sent all these kids a box of Legos, and we set up a lean manufacturing line with the stopwatch and did a mini Kaizen. It kind of showed them, and they were like, "Whoa!" I was like asking for feedback. Some of the feedback was like, "This is crazy. I don't know why we did this," but some of them were like, "Manufacturing is way more interesting and more technical than I thought." Like I think there's the misperception that manufacturing is some dingy factory worker hitting something with a hammer. It's not at all what it is. And unfortunately, the only places where they have really big industrialized zones are kind of in Asia now. And so we need to make that cool, and not associate it with some of the negative stuff that's been there. Hey, automotive is the backbone of the world. Like any politician knows, you win the UAW, you're going to win. Like there's an outsized influence. Now, what if we built another demographic of the domestic manufacturing unit or something like that, right? So like, how do we organize around this and catalyze? I think that's what you need to get politicians' attention, is a large pool of people that think the same. But we can unlock some of these things for young people and get them interested. They don't even know it's a thing. And quite frankly, right now, it's not a thing. So shame on us. We got to do better.
I think that these are all amazing points. I think this is the first time we've ever had two guests in a row who gave some really good advice to politicians. So last week we had Harry on, and Harry's going to go testify in front of Congress at some point. So I think he's a couple of levels above us at this point, Adam. But I think that is some very good advice. Let me go ahead and ask you some wrap-up questions with the promise that we will have to get you back on at some point in the future to continue these conversations and maybe see how some of these ideas have been enacted. But as we go to wrap up, so the question that I like to ask everyone is, what do you think the future is going to look like? It might be the future of reshoring. It might be the future of finding and bringing in more talent and exciting kind of the nation, exciting the regions. What do you think the future is going to look like?
I think we're going to make some policy shifts in terms of both trade balance. I think we're going to rebalance some of the trade elements the same way we do commodities and like farming. We're going to look at that in manufacturing, and I think green initiatives are going to play into this. Like you're going to start to have these green credits are going to start to be a bigger factor. Like, man, you ship a lot of stuff from China, you're going to pay more. And so I think the government will step in over the next 5 to 10 years, and then just like the surprise, energy grids are suffering because there's too many EVs now in certain states. Like I think we'll have some of these similar growing pains. We'll say, all right, we're gonna encourage this rush. It'll be like the gold rush. We'll encourage this, and we'll break some systems. Then we'll realize that we're not pumping out enough MEs or IEs or EEs or whatever. We'll figure this out pretty quick, and then we'll have the trade school imbalance. Like so. It kind of becomes a series of painful events, but I think in 10 years we've transformed the landscape, and we really are thinking hyper localized, right? So, people in Asia have different size footwear than people in North America, and in Europe it's also a different size, and that's why they have different sizing systems. But when everything is made local for local, you get this opportunity to exploit those regional differences in a way that the brands, they have never worked on this problem before. They're going to figure out that they can charge $10 more for this phone with an American flag on it.
Absolutely. No, I love that. And then the next question is, what sort of career advice would you offer? I mean, so your daughter that just graduated college, you suggested that she go into manufacturing, which we all thank you for. What would you suggest to someone maybe early or middle in their career? Maybe they're looking at getting into manufacturing or leaving. What would your suggestion be to them?
When you get new engineers, one of the things that manufacturers are doing now, which I don't love, is they're throwing them immediately into operations.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm coming out of this academic world, and I've been here and I'm studying hard, and you're going to throw me at operations, and I'm working alongside somebody who maybe doesn't have that formal education and don't have some of this life experience, and you're making me do this thing that I was never prepared for.
Mm-hmm.
I think it runs people up. Like, people start as an engineer at a very, very large, prominent domestic automotive, in which they throw them into ops for a year. And maybe they've learned something along the way that says that works for them. I'm not so sure. I think you have to make it something where there's multiple predefined paths
Mm-hmm.
that play to what you are passionate about. Maybe there are people that really want to go do controls. There are people that really want to go do process. There are people that love metallurgy. And so we need to give them a track, and there needs to be kind of the thought leader. Maybe it's like a fellow, like this person is hyper, so they're like Harry's like hyper smart. And then there's somebody that wants to be more operations focused. Give them these paths and make them accessible. I don't think it's organized right now. The software organization, the software industry is very organized like this. It's stratified right now, and like you kind of know, oh, I'm going to go into UX, or I'm going to go into back end, or I'm going to go into front end. Like, we don't do this with manufacturing today, and that's a big miss. We don't allow tailored career paths. We just said, oh, it's just basic manufacturing, and the only thing you can do is move up in the operational chain, which means I've got to go to Asia. I've got to have more people under me. I'm not creating experiences if I just really want to be smart and solve difficult problems. I don't find that trajectory. And if I do, it pays way less than going and just being a basic software person. Like, we have done this foundationally to ourselves in some ways.
No, I think that those are some exceptionally good points. Thank you for that, Adam. Now, I joked with you that I like to call this the not sponsored Audible section, in which I ask you for some book recommendations, and Vlad goes and downloads them on his phone. And you forewarned us that you're going to come with potentially a couple of strange book recommendations. So what do you have for us?
So one very topical that I had dusted off was this, Made in USA. There's a book. It's actually on this very subject topic. I hadn't read it for a little while, and some of it's dated, but the concepts are still very valid, and like thinking of things in terms of just this is wrong, right? I had forgotten that there are no. I don't know if you guys had noticed this during the pandemic. I went to a restaurant and they didn't give me silverware. I was like, "What's up with that?" And they said that there was a shortage of knives and forks. And I was like, no, this can't be. And I started Googling, and I was going to find this. And I found out, sure enough, there are no domestically made forks anymore.
Huh.
This is unacceptable. Like, talk about a
solution. I guess it was takeout. It was use your own fork at home.
I'm in a restaurant using a plastic fork, because that, which is terrible for the environment, those are plentiful. And I'm like, those are equally made in China. How can we get those when we can't get those? So it was just strange to me. That's a good one to go dust off and kind of revisit. And then I did mention to you guys that I'm a huge Tim Ferriss fan, 4-Hour Workweek. And if you read this and you're like, well, this doesn't apply to me at all, then you need to reread it because you didn't get it. But you can hyper optimize and be more efficient. And I'm always looking for edges that I'm inherently trying to get an edge to spend my time better.
No, those are both great recommendations. I appreciate that, Adam. And then lastly, who should reach out to you? Who do you want to connect with? Who are you looking for help? Who are you looking to help? Do you need help from other people?
I'm looking for, people that have manufacturing challenges relative to making things here. Maybe they can't figure it out. Maybe they don't know the first step, right? We love those customers. We love those kind of companies. And it could be a networking thing. I could just point you in the right direction, or I can say, there's like a bunch of stuff we can't work on right now. we're backed up, right? So if you bring me some super crazy, if you bring me tennis shoes, we can't work on it. But if you said, hey, I have this, this electronics application, but we just don't know where to make the first step. And hey, the hyper local thing really resonated with us because we'd like to have a different keyboard in this region or something like that. Mm-hmm. These folks should reach out, find us on, brightmachines.com, look for me on LinkedIn. Happy to talk, happy, even if it's just conversing or pointing them to somebody in the Rolodex. But we're looking for these customers that are taking it seriously and they need to mechanize. Either they've got a worker shortage problem or they have just a strong desire to bolster their capability. We love these projects.
No, I think that's perfect. I'm very excited. Hopefully you get some positive conversations and hopefully we can potentially come along the way and help document what you do. Cause I think that would be very interesting. I think it would be good for everyone within the industry. But no, Adam, I appreciate it. I did promise you we'd be about a 60-minute show, and here we are almost 90 minutes in. So thank you, Adam. Thank you for the great conversation and everyone who has been with us. Big thank you to Bright Machines for sponsoring this theme, all the work you're doing in reshoring and allowing Adam or connecting us with Adam so he can come on and share some of his amazing stories. I hear that there is talk of an Adam show, but Adam doesn't quite have enough time for an Adam show as of yet. But
it'll be a snooze fest.
No. I guarantee you there's going to be at least 3 people, Vlad, myself, and Paul, will be in on the Adam show, every Adam show there is. But we look forward to hearing when that's going to come out. If you guys have listened along on the podcast form, please feel free to drop us a like, rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and Audible. Please like the Manufacturing Hub Network page on LinkedIn and other places. Drop us a follow or drop Vlad a follow on Solus PLC. We'll go take credit for hitting 31,000 subscribers in a couple of weeks. And if you guys want to stay up to date with everything, you can visit us on manufacturinghub.live. You can even drop your email in there and get a notification about an hour before we go live every week. But until next week, thank you all.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.